Welcome to everyone who has joined South Africa's Freedom Day celebrations here in the UK, and to those that are joining us from around the globe, primarily both in the UK and in South Africa. And I thank you very much for all joining us. We have an amazing lineup of people, which I'll introduce to you in a moment. And we're going to be here to celebrate what changed South Africa, probably changed Africa, and we did it in the way that would have been believed impossible if you look back into the early 90s when life did change for us. I'm Sharon Constanson. I'm chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here to host your evening tonight and hope that we have a fantastic time together. We have an amazing lineup of activities and of things that we will be sharing with you, as well as the individual. Everybody has a different view as to what happened on that day and what it did for them. So we've got a number of those sharings that we're going to have with you over and above talking to our panel. Our panel will be led by the very well-known John Battersby, who will come on camera shortly, but we've got a few things that we're going to do before that. From my point of view, just sharing back to the day when I went to go and vote. Having been a South African, I'd been able to vote a few times. I was old enough that I'd voted a few times before 1994. And go to that experience of going to a different location, because I now lived out in the countryside. And instead of being in town, I was out in the farmlands. And took our whole household, and we all went off to go and vote, expecting it to be a very short experience because we'd got there at 5:30 in the morning, and we would be over by as soon as voting had opened, because there wouldn't be many people. It was a sparsely populated part of the world, just north of Johannesburg, close to Lanseria, actually. And when we got there, we thought, okay, we're fairly near the end of the beginning of the queue. But as the sort of hours went by and we hadn't yet voted, and more hours went by and we still hadn't voted yet, I couldn't believe how many people there were in the queues, and the fun and the laughter and the chatting and the people we had met that became lifelong friends that we met in those queues that day. It really did change my life, and I'm so grateful. And I just want to say thank you, Mandela, for what you actually did achieve for us, which has been an amazing occurrence. The Chamber is going to be talking about all the different experiences that our panel has had. And just to introduce who is going to be talking to you today, first of all, we have Her Excellency Nelson Tembi Tambo, the High Commissioner to London. She will be giving us a few words. She is our nominated head of the South African Chamber, and she'll be sharing her insights of hopefully her uncle, as she used to call him. So we're looking forward to hearing from her about Uncle Mandela. So that will be, and Uncle Nelson actually is probably more the way they used to refer to him. John Battersby, I've introduced to you already. We've then got Zondwa Mandela, which is the grandson to Mandela, and he will be talking to John in conversation. Annabelle Wundler is actually Nelson Mandela's pilot from back in those days. And she's an amazing lady. We really are looking forward to some of the stories she's going to share. John, I'm sure you've done your research. You'll tease out all sorts of tidbits of gossip and of interest that we're going to be able to share. Veronica, like me, was around in those days, and as a coach and a businesswoman who advises many, many companies, has her inspiration and ideas of what that did for her business, and as a woman, her opportunities in South Africa had changed as a result of that. Kathy Scott is Mandela. We all talk about Kathy Scott as Mandela, Nelson Mandela's Children's Fund. Everything that fund has achieved over the decades is thanks to Kathy Scott, who you will hear does not sound South African at all, but I'll leave her accent for you guys to all work out where she's from. So this is who our panel is and who we're really looking forward to spending the evening with. We are going to be starting now. Before we start any of the activities of the evening, I'd like to just ask us all to enjoy our South African Chamber's version of the national anthem. So I'm going to start with that one first. So if you just bear with me, we are going to enjoy, and I'll be with you in a moment.
Nkosi sikeleli Afrika, maluphakangiso uit die blauw van onze hemel, uit die diepte van ons ziel, oor ons eeuwige gebergtes, waar je kransen antwoord geeft, zelfs de call to come together and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land.
Our version, we've sung along to that song a number of times as a community, and some of the people in that song have actually put words together for you today as well. If you're looking forward to that, we have another song which is a tribute to Nelson Mandela. But before that, Tembi, Her Excellency, the High Commissioner, Tembi Tambo, would you like to share your days and knowledge and stories of Uncle Nelson?
Well, thank you so much for this wonderful event, Sharon, that you put on probably the most important day for South Africans in our history, the 27th of April, 27 years ago. That's how long we have been a democratic country. I remember the day of voting. In fact, it went across a few days. And I remember those days vividly because there was still, we were still recovering, I think, or concerned to some degree that there might be violence during the elections, because there had been so much emotion around what was happening in South Africa, what had happened with Uncle Nelson having been released from jail, and with a lot of opposition to the ANC and other liberation organizations still quite obvious at the time. So it was fascinating for me to go with my mother to the East Rand. Our job was to go and check on the voting stations there and make sure that everything was okay and orderly. And of course to vote ourselves, because my parents lived in the East Rand. And it was fascinating as well because when one thinks back on those days and one thinks of how Uncle Nelson was, always just a very sweet man, very kind. He had, of course, the leadership qualities that we all know, but he was a family man. You'll hear, no doubt, from his grandson a bit later, but he also had a tremendous sense of humor. And he also was someone who really paid attention to detail. He had a brilliant mind, and he was brilliant at tracking things. So it's a story I've probably told before, but for those who are not aware, a few weeks before I got married, which was in 1991, I think, was it? No, 81, must have been. And a few weeks before that, I got this letter. And it was delivered to our house, and it was from Uncle Nelson, and he'd written to me from prison, and he was telling me how to be a good wife, basically, and the things I needed to do and the things I needed to pay attention to. But it was a beautifully crafted letter, of course, with his background it would have been, but it was so kind, it was so gentle, it was funny. And it was amazing to me that with everything that he had endured and continued to endure, that he could remember that I was getting married and that I received this letter before my wedding. So the planning of that was meticulous. I also remember when he was released, turning to my mother and saying, "There now, it's done, he's out. How do you feel?" And she was over the moon with excitement. And I think some sadness as well, that it had taken so much longer than anyone had anticipated. Of course, we were fighting a formidable foe. But when he came to our house in Muswell Hill, it felt as if the whole world had come with him. He was very down to earth, always jovial, joking, a kind word, an interest. And of course, he was tall. And my family are all very short. So even as an adult, I was very much aware of the sort of regal stature that he had. And he had a way of carrying himself that you could see that this was someone from royalty. You could tell in his demeanor, in everything about him. And he used to like to joke and tell stories himself, a very good storyteller, excellent memory. And of course, we miss him. We miss him desperately. We miss his wisdom at times like this. And we miss his sense of encouragement and optimism that he always had with him, and his the integrity with which he dealt with everything. He didn't suffer fools gladly, I can tell you that much, but he was always kind to people who were suffering, people who were hurt, and he understood very well that you have to keep fighting. And here we are in 2021, and the lesson I think that we can take from our liberation was that we came from a very dark place in South African history, and we're in a very dark place now, globally, not just in South Africa, but we just have to keep on fighting and keep our optimism alive and keep remembering what incredible people South Africans actually are. And with that, I will say thank you for giving me your attention, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of this fabulous, fabulous evening.
Thank you, Tembi. That's absolutely wonderful. I so appreciate it. I knew we would hear the real person, the family person that you know him as, that we don't. I'm now going to play a tribute to Nelson Mandela that has been done by Corin Zoid, a South African singer-songwriter, but she is singing an extremely well-known song, and I hope you enjoy it with us. And then I shall be introducing John Battersby.
Well, I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major left. The baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. But she tied you to a kitchen chair, she broke your throne and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Oh, baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. You know, I used to live alone before I knew you. Do you remember when I moved in you and the holy dove was moving too, and every breath we drew was hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Well, I did my best, but it wasn't much. I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. You know, I didn't come to fool you. But even if it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Quite emotional listening to that. I don't know how you guys felt, but for me that was unbelievably special. Now I'd like to hand over to John. John, thank you very much, one of the directors of the Chamber, somebody who had the honor of walking up and meeting Mandela as he came out of prison that wonderful day in the early 90s. So John, you've got a panel of people who everyone knows who they are. Enjoy, and I will keep time for you.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and welcome to everybody who's sharing the celebration of Freedom Day with us, and particularly to our outstanding panel who will be telling us their stories shortly. And that really, as I see it, is the focus of this session, is to hear how Nelson Mandela, who was crucial in the struggle for freedom, and along with many South Africans who sacrificed their lives and went through extraordinary suffering and hardship to achieve the freedom, without Mandela's overall leadership and his own sacrifice in spending 27 years in prison, we might have had a very different outcome. So I'll just start off with the story of how I came to, on the day of the release, how I came to be in the prison grounds before anybody else. It was certainly not planned. It was totally spontaneous, and there was a bit of serendipity and involved. If you will recall, on that amazing day when the sun shone brightly and the sky was absolutely blue, and a large crowd of journalists had gathered from the morning outside the prison, the grounds of the prison border in Paarl. There was only one media person who's actually allowed into the grounds, and that was Clarence Cater from the South African Broadcasting, who'd been given the go-ahead to park his vehicle inside and to give the commentary to the world. But of course, things don't always work out the way they're supposed to. And at 3 o'clock, when Nelson Mandela was due to be released from prison, there was no sign of him, and the word went out that it was going to take longer because a large delegation from the Mass Democratic Movement had entered the prison and were busy having a conversation with Mr. Mandela about the speech that he was due to make at the parade. And that went on for an hour, during which time I had walked in at 5 to 3. I'd been to the airport to fetch my brother-in-law, so I came very late to the prison, and my head was full of this incredible day of history, which was unfolding before us. And without really thinking too much, I just walked into the prison gates and tried to look as inconspicuous as possible. Unbeknown to me, I was more inconspicuous, partly because I had a slate blue suit, which is quite similar to the police uniform, although that was certainly not planned. Anyway, I stood as unobtrusively as I could for that hour near a tap, because it was a very hot day, and taking the odd sip of water. And sure enough, at 4 o'clock almost on the dot, this extraordinary sight, this extraordinary moment when the transformation of a myth into a live human being with flesh and blood, because most of us had never met Mandela in his youth. He'd been away for 27 years. We hadn't even seen much in the way of photographs, and only a very, very small number of people had been to actually visit him in prison. So it was a complete unknown. And there he was, this very imposing, tall, dignified figure, walking down with Winnie Mandela at his side, and the group of Mass Democratic Movement people around him, striding towards the gates of the prison, but where the media was gathered. But for that moment, for one moment, it felt as though they were striding towards me, because I sort of went forward. And when Mandela caught my eye and I extended my hand to shake his, broad smile came across his face, and I understand that he recognized me from the photograph in the Cape Times, because I used to write a frequent column from London in those days about talking to the ANC and listening to the likes of the ANC leader in exile, Oliver Tambo, Tembi Tambo's father. And I recall writing one column where I suggested that it was ridiculous for me to be able to be listening as a South African journalist to the words of Oliver Tambo and his colleagues in the ANC in London, but they couldn't be published in South Africa because of the laws against suppression of communism and terrorism. So I made this point to the editor of the Cape Times, and he said, "Well, look, let me work on that." He didn't tell me what he was going to do, but he came to London and he did an interview with Oliver Tambo. That was back in 1986, so I'm going slightly back now, but just to bring in how the interview with Oliver Tambo, published against the law in the Cape Times in South Africa, 2,000 words across 2 pages, kind of cracked the mystique of the ANC in South Africa and enabled people to read the words of the leader. To come back then to Pollsmoor, not Pollsmoor, to the prison warder's house in Paarl on that day, I had the handshake. It was an incredible moment. Shivers went down my spine, and they still do when I think about it. To come back to the present, it's very difficult to talk about Freedom Day without talking about Nelson Mandela, because they are inextricably intertwined. Clearly, the values for which Mandela stood and acted are the underpinning of the values that we have all internalized, or that we are in the process of internalizing as a result of that freedom. And there's a tremendous paradox in this, because a lot of the interviews I did with Mandela, but one in particular just after he stepped down as president, it was a very profound interview in which I asked him profound questions, because that was the nature of the interview that I pitched. And he said that had he not gone to prison, a lot of the things that he managed to achieve might never have happened. So that's something I have thought about and meditated on a lot since then, because clearly Mandela was able to achieve what he achieved because he had found the goodness in himself, and he had managed, therefore, to find goodness in everybody else. He used to say that even when you see the most ordinary person who you would normally just walk past, if you stop and you talk to them, you will find that they have within them the ability to be great and that they are extraordinary people. And in his lifetime, he, and beyond, but certainly in his lifetime, he has inspired so many people. I cannot count on many hands the number of people that I've met whose lives have been changed. And I hope we're going to hear from some of our panelists later how their lives were changed. I know how my life was changed because I was a journalist, so I had to keep, a part of me was the objective journalist who had to write about history, and the other part was just subsumed in this extraordinary moment in history where the meaning of integrity suddenly became crystal clear to me, that integrity is doing what you say. It's where your actions intersect with your words. And that was Mandela's life from the time that he went into prison until his sad passing in 2013. It was a life of integrity, doing exactly what he said. And that inspired people, and he inspired people by making them feel that their humanity was not only being totally acknowledged, but that they could achieve anything that they wanted to achieve if they set their minds to it. Because he always said in the interviews that in order to achieve what you set out to achieve, you need to persuade people of the correctness of your cause. And that's what he did in prison and after he came out of prison. And in fact, the moment he walked out of prison, he'd already achieved 75% of his contribution, amazing contribution to history, because of the example that he'd set. And he came out without bitterness, without revenge. And as was quoted in that extraordinary piece by Corin Zoid, one of the quotes was that if he had had sense of resentment and revenge and anger, he would not have been able to achieve what he achieved. So it wasn't just out of some kind of goodness that he did that. He did it because of a very logical thing. And he told Bill Clinton that when they were standing in his cell on Robben Island. Clinton was getting a bit short on friends at that time because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And Mandela stood by him throughout. And he asked Mandela, how is it that you can come out after everything that's happened to you and be so free of any kind of anger or resentment? And that was the answer that Mandela gave. Thanks very much. And we're about to welcome Kathy. Kathy, I wonder if you could share with us your experience, because you've come a very long way, and in a formal way, being the head of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund here in the UK. Could you just share with us, perhaps going back, how you came about to play this role and what impact it's had on your life?
Well, if I can remember that far back. So obviously, at the beginning, Sharon referred to my accent, and I think once Cheryl Carolus explained that I was an honorary South African living in London with a Northern Ireland accent. So hopefully that clears up that end of things. Yes, I was born in Northern Ireland. I had my fair share of growing up in a Breeze Nation. I came from a mixed family, as we referred to that in our country. But my father was a remarkable man, and he taught me about Nelson Mandela and apartheid from I was a very young age. So from about 7 years old, I became very interested in South Africa and the politics, and learned as much as I could. At the same time, doing a lot in Northern Ireland as a young student to promote integration and equality. So sort of fighting racism was a big thing my entire life. So back in the days of the Troubles, you couldn't get much employment in Northern Ireland, and I actually left and moved overseas, and I ended up working for a South African law firm. And I think the first question that I asked them was, how progressive are you? And they were fantastically progressive, and they were really interested that I knew a lot about South African politics. So I worked for the South African law firm for a number of years, and then I got asked one day by one of the partners about meeting Mr. Mandela, and they said, he's asked me, that the gentleman's name was Michael Solomon, and he said, the president has asked me to set up the Children's Fund in the UK, and I've told him about you, and you're very interested in integration and fighting racism and so forth. And so I was asked to go and meet him on a private, he was having a private visit in the UK. I went and I met him, and the first thing he said to me was, you're very young, can you do the job? Shouldn't you be at school? And that was, and I think the bravery and the courage of youth, I said, yes, I can do the job, absolutely. And that's how I got my job. And my first task was within 2 weeks to organise a really high profile breakfast for 80 people at the High Commission. And I went out and bought myself 2 books, and one was Debrett's Guide to Speaking in Public, and the Debrett's Guide to How to Address very high profile people and lords and ladies. I've still got those 2 books. So that was my first introduction to Mr. Mandela.
Yes, fantastic. And your meetings with him, tell us a little bit about that and the impact that his presence and interacting with him had on you.
Well, you know, it was, again, you just said really brilliantly about how you felt when you first met him and how you were overcome, and it was almost like a surreal experience. And I get asked this question a lot by young students when we go into school and do school visits, school assemblies, especially primary school students. And I actually have this comparison where I say that one of my favorite animals in the world is a giraffe. And meeting Mr. Mandela for the first time was a bit like the first time I saw a giraffe in real life in the bush. And that was that you knew it existed and it was extremely important to you, but you couldn't quite believe it was there in reality. So like anybody, I think Mr. Mandela had the most incredible personality and aura about him, that when you went into a room and you met him, and it never died. You know, in the 18 years that I worked with him, that he was with us, that never changed. The minute you met him, you felt you were in that presence of something very, very special. And he brought the best out of you. It was like you became so passionate about your work and about achieving the greater good and fighting the good fight. It wasn't, he inspired loyalty, but he never demanded it. So for me, it was, you just got this wave of passion about doing good every time that you were with him. And I think that's what really, that's what it meant for me.
Very interesting. And tell us about his special connection with children, which he demonstrated very shortly after he came out of prison. I remember being at a meeting at the Mount Nelson Hotel in Cape Town, and he emphasized, you know, the need for children. And you could see when he saw children, a bit like when he saw pretty girls, actually, his face would light up with a very broad smile. And it's almost as though there was a kind of electric connection.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that he said that he missed the most when he was on Robben Island was the sound of children's voices. And as you quite rightly say, that night at that meeting was really the formation of the Children's Fund, because he left that event and a group of street children ran up to his vehicle. And the first thing that one of them said to him was, "Mr. President, why do you love us?" And he was quite shocked by that, you know, these were street children, but they knew who he was. And, you know, he spent a bit of time with them. And he said that he went home that night and he tossed and he turned, and he couldn't actually get this out of his mind, and that he could have given some money and, you know, eased his conscience, but he knew that wasn't going to solve the long-term problems in the country. And that's when the very next day he gathered together a group of very prominent people in South Africa into his living room and said, I'm going to start a charity, and I'm going to donate 1/3 of my annual presidential salary to found and run that charity. And that he asked and challenged people all over the world to match that commitment, which they did. So he had an incredible love of children, and, you know, his wish was to see children experiencing deserved childhood through the creation of a world fit for them. And the task that we have and had and still have at the Children's Fund is to make sure that there's joy in children's lives and not just a blight that's becoming the norm.
Yes, I see. And in the last few years, you've been specifically focusing on the fundraising for the Mandela Children's Hospital in Johannesburg. How is that panning out?
Yeah, it's gone very well. Obviously, we had a massive task on our hands. We had to raise over $100 million to build that hospital. It took us about 10 years to, you know, to do the feasibilities, to raise the money and to put the hospital up. But it's running incredibly well, and we've managed to save thousands of children's lives and give them a better quality of life. And obviously at the moment we've got strong challenges with COVID, and also then unfortunately with the fire at the hospital across the street from ours last week, we've had added pressure of trying to accommodate many children from that hospital into our own. But it's going well.
Very good. Thanks very much, Kathy. It was very interesting.
Thanks, Kathy. It was fantastic.
So, Annabelle, are you with us? Nice to see you. And
nice
looking
to see you too, John.
Very striking in your official uniform. Annabelle, I'm very interested to hear from you about this incident in your youth when your father, I understand, arranged for you to go into the cockpit of the big bird in the sky. Tell us about that, and it clearly made a big impression on you.
Yes, it did. My mom was actually traveling. I didn't go into the cockpit. I wasn't lucky. I hadn't seen an aircraft for the first time in my life. But I was at the airport and I was looking at these big birds, and then I saw cabin crew walking through the terminal, and they were astonishing. They looked absolutely stunning. And I said to my mom, well, you know, who are these ladies? Because they're all wearing the same uniform. And my mom said, well, that's the cabin crew, but I'm not too sure exactly what they do, but they do serve quite a lot of beef and chicken. And I said, no, well, I'm not interested in doing that. And then I saw these men wearing hats behind them, and they looked absolutely dashing. And I said to my mom, well, what do? Do they also serve beef and chicken? And she said, no, they actually fly the airplane. And I said, well, I want to do that. I don't want to serve beef and chicken. I actually want to fly the airplane. And she said, well, it's not for girls, and it's not for girls like you. So forget that. You can go and be like an accountant, or you can do something else, but flying is not for you. So just forget it. And I tell you, I always had it at the back of my mind that this is what I wanted to do, John.
You certainly didn't forget it.
How old were you at that time? I think I was 7 years old. 7 years old. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And fast forward to the time when you were working in the commercial airlines, and you flew the plane with Nelson Mandela. How did that come about? And tell us about the experience.
Okay, so just to correct you, John, President Mandela only flew in the military. So purely because of security protocol, he only flew in the military aircraft. And also we could cater to his diet and to his specific needs. So, you know, I started at the VIP squadron in 2005 after I'd done my stint in the States as an instructor for a year. So I got to the presidential squadron, and did all the necessary training and started flying President Mandela. I do remember the first time I got onto the aircraft. Well, I had to meet him outside the aircraft first, so he's pretty tall. And, he just gave me this look as in, what is this child doing standing next to the aircraft? So I thought, oh God, like, how am I going to explain to him how old I am? Because I was just 25 at the time. So I got into the aircraft, and the captain I was flying with at the time, before I became a captain, had said, well, President Mandela, I need to introduce you to the new first officer. Her name is this. And so he says, okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Young lady, come over here. And he started grilling me. Hey, he wanted to know where I came from. He wanted to know how old I was. Does my mother and my father know that I'm doing this flying thing and I'm flying him? And do they know that, I'm flying a head of state and I'm only 25 years old? And then the stories, because I flew him for 5 years.
Wow.
In the military. And, every time him and Mama Grasa, we'd fly him sometimes alone, but other times we'd fly him with Mama Grasa. And it was just so interesting, the stories that he had. And one of them was the first time he ever met female pilots. And I vividly remember he was saying that he was in West Africa, and he saw these two women in uniform walk onto the aircraft. He was with a head of state, and he asked the head of state, what are these two women doing on board? And the head of state said, well, these women are going to be flying us. And he said, I couldn't believe that other parts of Africa were so advanced with their women in aviation. And he was so happy to see that it is happening in other parts of Africa, but it will happen in South Africa soon. And so he was so happy and so proud to see that there was a woman of color that was sitting in front of an aircraft and flying him, and actually, being eventually a captain and commanding the aircraft and being so young. And he always used to say, this is what we fought for. This is what we fought for.
Amazing. Yeah. And you must have felt a huge burden of responsibility on the first time you flew him.
Oh yes, because he was always peering. He would constantly be looking over Mama Grasa's shoulder to see if I was doing pressing the right button. Every time my hand reached for something, he'd be looking at me like, how is this being in front? But I think he was definitely very proud, definitely.
Wow, amazing story. And how is your interaction with him, albeit in a very official sense as his pilot? How has that impacted you on your life, and what's happened since then?
During 27th in 94, I was 27th of April, I was still very young, so I couldn't vote or anything. And when President Mandela was released from jail, I always just thought, wow, this is such a magnificent man. One day, I really hope that I'll be able to fly. And, interacting with him for so many years and flying with him for so many years and listening to the talks, it was not a lecture. It was always just a conversation. It wasn't as if it was, those sort of lectures where you'd zone out or you would not be listening. It was just so inspiring. And I must say, I learned so much about resilience, and I learned so much that somebody can go through so much and still come out positive, still come out inspired for change. And also, as Tembi had said, he had such good memory, because I remember he could remember my house number, he could remember where I lived, he could remember my parents' name, he could remember all those things. And I just imagine how many people he was meeting every day that he was having conversations with. So that also taught me about remembering people's names when I met them for the first time. So yes, no, definitely a very inspirational man.
Fantastic story. Thank you so much, Annabelle, for sharing with us. Zondra, you're unmuted and ready to go.
Yeah. Hi, John.
There you are. All right.
I am. Yeah. I don't know if you're asking whether I'm in. Yeah, I'm in Cape Town or wherever I am in South Africa. Good evening and good morning, good afternoon to everyone else all over the world.
Great to see you, and thanks so much for joining us.
No problem.
Zondra, you come at this from a very special position, being a part of the family, and it was an honor to have shared a couple of occasions with you at the South African High Commission, and then at the South Bank Centre when you were when you had your children, right? Tata Mandela's great-grandchildren, launching with your late mother the book on their conversations, which was a very moving occasion. Tell us about what it's been like growing up in the Mandela family, what you have absorbed, what you have internalized, and how it's affected your life. You now head the Mandela Legacy Foundation, and you started that business promotion, the Career Box, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Tell us about how this has all panned out for you.
Well, I mean, I'll also tie it back to the occasion that actually brings us here, John. So I mean, look, on the particular day, I mean, I didn't actually get a chance to vote in 1994, and then not for any other reason other than the fact that I was not old enough. But for me, I was privileged enough to be in close proximity to what would represent, I'd say, the last decade of the struggle against apartheid, which culminated on that significant day. And when I reflect on that day, I remember the overwhelming sense of accomplishment exhibited by my grandparents and those closest to them. However, I could see it in my grandparents' eyes on a daily basis that this particular victory that they achieved, in fact, came at a great loss. So much had been taken away from us as a family, from them as individuals, and definitely as Black families, in order for us to, in fact, present ourselves to that particular occasion. And, for me, at a personal level, I honestly struggle to dichotomize the history of Nelson and Winnie. Because I guess prior to my grandfather's release, I have vivid memories of the time that they spent together having intense debates on their collective future, the political climate at the time, and more significantly, what it meant attaining Nelson's release. And this is important because, at the time, there was no one else, for me, other than my grandmother, who continued to instill that sense of belief that one day Nelson would be free and would become president of South Africa. She instilled that belief not only in us, but she also ensured that my grandfather would, or rather, in fact, believed that that day, in fact, would come. And I remember the euphoria on my grandfather's face and demeanor on the day he was released, the day you all have, in fact, referred to, which, in fact, is the same expression and feeling that I actually saw in him on the day he voted. It was a heartfelt occasion that was, experienced, that in fact we as a family were appreciative to actually experience together, and also experience together with South Africans. And to me, these occasions represented like key milestones that had been attained, but they definitely did not represent the end of a journey. I say this because the many conversations I had with my grandfather, it was clear that the day he cast his vote was the beginning of possibly one of our biggest challenges. And in hindsight, and depending on which generation you belong to, was one of our longest journeys to date. And he would ask the question of, how do you maintain the aspiration, for people to want better for society? How do you ensure the promise is kept? How do you guarantee that whatever emanates from this particular moment is without a doubt a free and just society? And I think asking those questions were not, were not to nullify that particular date, because, the 27th of April, 1994, I think will ever remain an important moment as it represents the first non-racial national election where South Africa elected their first Black president. And so in terms of going forward, I think it's really a question of our interpretation of the concept of freedom. To me, freedom is a term that I believe currently is incomplete. I think the question should be, how do we construct the freedom we seek so that the freedom by definition is one reflective of its achievements and the lives we live into perpetuity. To me, freedom is so deeply connected to one's emotion and state of mind, making it impossible to be a static concept. So to me, freedom is one of those experiences that I believe should be a very fluid concept. And the reason why I'm touching on this is that, we tend to make the mistake, John, of interpreting that our basic existence and livelihood is in fact freedom personified, whereas there's a system that we live by which itself conveniently is inefficient and willfully exposes the suffering of communities. Is the perceived sense of freedom enough if people do not have the means or resources to exert themselves fully in freedom space? And how do we, having no means, provide for ourselves an adequate reflection of what freedom should be? So, as an organization, one of the things that have been very mindful, John, as Mandela Legacy Foundation, and in keeping within, the legacy of my grandfather has been, when we reflect now on the past and we reflect on the plans of going forward, how do we now start focusing on building back better and ensuring that we consider the evolution of freedom and space? And I believe the manner in which we can do that and continue to uphold their work and how we choose to do it as an organization under Mandela Legacy is to encourage, participation and solidarity. We focus on ending discrimination of any kind. And, we want to address any inequality that exists within society, but also very importantly is participate in programs that are not only socially significant, but are sustainable towards social development.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Zondo. It's very interesting to hear your goals and objectives. And I'm sure that from my contacts and from following you, that you are having a great impact. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Veronica, I'd like to ask you about your involvement in coaching, professional coaching. And I know that you have a consultancy, because coaching to me is such a central activity for spreading the vision and the values that Mandela worked hard to underpin the freedom that we now have, which Zondo has been talking about. And of course, as we all know, there's no such thing as absolute freedom. Freedom comes with responsibilities. And I think as a society, we're probably learning that now. But tell us a bit about how you're coaching, how you got into the coaching. And I've done a little amateur coaching myself, and I find it's one of the most rewarding things that I've done. So I'd like to hear from a professional as to how you go about it, and also to what extent you've been inspired in your career choices by the example of Mandela and your interaction with his vision and values.
Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody, and happy Freedom Day. It's lovely to be here. So I think I would like to start because the impact of the day, the 27th of April, 1994, is what really kind of helped me choose and decide what I wanted to do. So I was already about 30, so almost half my life I was in apartheid. So what the 27th of April, 94 represented for me was the true horizon of hope it gave me an opportunity to take off that big cloak of assimilation that I wore for those first 30 years of my life, for safety, because the system was obviously designed to accommodate the minority and the dominant people in our country. So that day, I remembered standing in this queue for hours, but it just seemed timeless because I was being held up by my optimism and focusing on the horizon of hope. And that hope was for me to be truly free, and free to be me, free to embrace my Blackness, free to really focus on my dreams and of living a fulfilled life, of which I had been denied until that point. So for me, with my coaching and with my facilitation, the intention I hold is always one to focus on healing and building our nation. And it's also part of rehumanizing our people. The majority of the people in our country were dehumanized under that oppressive system of apartheid. So the focus and the intention with the work that I do as a coach and a facilitator is really instilling hope and confidence in people that the success, while we were programmed and we'd internalized this inferiority and internalized our repression, so that also made us think that success was only for a select few. So with coaching and doing facilitation, it's about really having people understand that we all can access that success, and we have a voice, and we need to reclaim our voices and shine our light. So that for me was a big, big thing on that day. And that's the hope I carry with me ever since, because for those first 30 years of my life, which were the formative years of my life, I had to hide my light behind a bushel for safety. So the hope that I bring to my clients is for them to be able to know that they have the full human rights to live a fulfilled life, and I work a lot in corporate South Africa, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the intention with that work is, how do we really encourage dialogue and conversation? Because without dialogue and conversation, there won't be much connection. And I think that was the beautiful gift that Nelson Mandela brought in the moments of our democracy, his ability to have a big open heart and to connect with people. And that connection enables us to be free, to really be authentic. I spoke about assimilation. So the freedom that Mandela, the essence of who his stature, his presence, often just gave me the hope of being authentic. And that's where the true freedom came. So with back to coaching, given that that was your question, I continue to focus on how do I help organizations create inclusive workplaces where all people of South Africa are represented, expected, valued, and respected, because those were the things that I often felt that I hung onto with both my hands whenever I did interact or hear Nelson Mandela speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you. You've articulated that very, very clearly and powerfully, and thanks for sharing that. My last question to you would be, you've been, it's 27 years later now since that voting day and the magic cues. What progress as a country, we know that we're going through difficulties on various fronts, but what progress as a country and as the people in the country do you think we've made since then in the past 27 years? And what have you seen in your coaching?
So I think there has been a lot of progress. I think working in the corporate space, doing coaching, human development, I think the implementation of transformation strategy, I know there's lots of comments and diverse comments about Black economic empowerment and employment equity, but there has been progress in that regard, and there's still room for a lot more to be done. We've come a long way, and we still have a very, very long way to go before people are really seen as where there is equity, and we are seen and respected for the value that we bring.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your time and sharing very passionately your story. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Veronica, as with all of them, absolutely amazing. Guys, we have got an opportunity. We'll put in a couple of questions. We are running a little over time. This question to Annabelle, if actually could all the panelists come on screen, because it actually makes it a little bit more easier for me to post the questions to you. Annabelle, you've got the first question. Did Nelson Mandela ever give you advice about politics?
No, he didn't give me advice ever about politics. He actually was more interested in where I saw myself in the next 5 to 10 years. So we spoke about whether I was going to stay in the military or whether I was going to go fly commercially, and what backup system do I have? What is my plan B? What is my plan C? And young lady, you've got to have plan D, E, and F, and you've got to finish your degree, and you've got to. So it was more about my progression as an individual.
And that moment when he saw you as a young girl, in his eyes, a young lady in your eyes who was qualified to do the job of being the first officer. From there to when you moved on, and give us some reason as to where obviously plan B was that you did move on. What sort of relationship did you actually build with Nelson Mandela, the person, or was it always a distant professional, never getting that close?
It's impossible not to interact with him for such a long time, for so many years, and not develop almost like a grandfather sort of relationship, because it was always very personal. And the advice that he would give, my plan B was always to go and fly commercially. And he would always ask about, which airline would I want to go to, but I must, marriage also, if I want to get married, and then, the children that came with it, and the advice about that. And, I would always just listen and say, yes, Baba, yes, yes. Okay, we're going to fly now. And have you had enough rest? Are you good? And so, it was always, if you're going to study this. I know somebody who did this and who did that, and he can give you very good advice. I will link you up with this young man. So it was always about, he wanted to see that every single young person that he encountered and was actually making forward in this new South Africa had the backup and had the backing and the encouragement to continue and not give up.
Thank you. It's very insightful. I'm hearing a lot of themes which we will sum up at the end. But Kathy, a question that's for you is the children that he has helped in the through the Nelson Mandela's Children's Fund. That's years, it's a couple of decades and more that fund and that charity has existed. Where are those children, adults now, from those early days, and how have they benefited from knowing him and being part of the outcome of the charity that he started?
No, it's a really interesting question, that, because back in those early years, your focus was very much, and Mr. Mandela made this very clear to us at the beginning when we set up the charity, and that was that, people are going to judge us on our results. So, as quickly as we're getting money in, we have to get that money out, and we have to make sure that as many children as possible are helped. So in those first couple of years, we funded over 650 different projects. So when you do something on that scale, it's very difficult to have a monitoring and evaluation program in place. And actually that took years before you realize the significance of what you needed to do. We have, over the years, in recent years, started to work on trying to trace as many children and young people as we can. And it was a really interesting exercise. A few years ago, there was a theatre production in London called Emojo in the West End. And we worked very closely with them, and we did a lot of sort of fundraising during that period. And we discovered that out of the 30 cast, at least 25, I think it was at the time, had somehow benefited through different programs that we'd funded. And so it's really difficult when you're helping, you know, anything up to 100,000 children a year to actually capture each individual and work out what they're doing. But I know that there has been work done in the last 2 or 3 years to, and especially leading up to our 25th anniversary, which was last year, which we'd started to work on to try and trace and see where they all are.
I think you're going to have some wonderful stories that you can put together. I see a book being developed. I'm just going to ask one question of the whole panel, if you can answer in one sentence, and then we'll move on to a very short video. John, if I may start with you, then Veronica, then Annabelle, then Kathy, then Zondwa. One sentence response to this question, please. It is quite broad. If you look at South Africa needs to regain some optimism and progress economic development and progress further equality from what it already has. And also equally, how do we improve South Africa's prospects, and how do we capture the optimism and the energy of Mandela to take South Africa to the next place we want to go forward? One sentence from each of you. John, starting with you, then Veronica.
Well, I can think of no better way of doing that than to keep alive the vision and the values that Mandela gave us. Clearly, he was looking beyond the horizon. It was a historic transformation that he presided over. And that was clearly there were going to be hard times. You don't not have hard times after the past that we'd had. So it's a question of how we keep those alive. And when you travel abroad, as I have been lately, you just never cease to be amazed by every country in the most faraway places have got tributes to Mandela, have got monuments to Mandela. It's extraordinary. The island of Madeira in Portugal, it was recently a head of Mandela, which was unveiled. He's had a huge impact on the world because of his values. And
fantastic. Thanks.
It's our job to keep that alive.
And I so agree with you, Veronica.
I think it's about those who have the power, whether it's economic power or other privileges, to recognize those privileges and use them to achieve Mandela's vision.
Thank you, Veronica. Nice, short and succinct. Annabelle?
I think the biggest hope for South Africans is that to break the race barriers is through economic freedom for all previously disadvantaged. And that's basically it. Which
is what he fought for right from the beginning. Kathy?
I'd say 2 very quick things. I think number one, for the hope and future of South Africa, to remember that there is strength in diversity. And the second thing is that obviously working for charity, I would say that people need to help to continue to ensure that the legacy of Nelson Mandela survives by actually supporting organizations and charities, the great work that Zond was doing that you've heard about, and our organizations to protect through helping the country's most treasured assets, and that's the children.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Quick word from you, Zondwa?
Yeah, I would say definitely it's about investing in youth and creating opportunity for the disenfranchised.
Thank you very much. That's great. We're going to have a few words from many people that are part of the chamber, are related to the chamber, on what 1994 has meant to them, and then we will sum up after that. So thank you very much to the panel. I'll thank you formally in a moment.
Why is Freedom Day important? Freedom Day is important because it is the day many people worked very hard for. Not only has this earned us the privilege and freedom to do what it is that we want to do, it has given us the opportunity to live our lives in peace and in harmony. Happy Freedom Day.
Freedom Day instantaneously inclines me to compare my life to that of my parents, especially my mother. Freedom Day for me means a black, confident, liberated woman leading. And as a consequence, South Africa is able to reap the benefits of a confident person who is a leader in society, who is an economic participant, who is knowledgeable, and therefore moves the country forward.
On the 27th of April 1994, South Africans saw the dawning of the most awaited day. I was a child, I was still in primary school, but I do remember my mom and my dad were so happy. The vibe outside, everybody was singing vibrant songs. Everyone was high-fiving. It was truly a memorable day. Freedom Day to me means restoration, peace, love, respect, and limitless opportunities and possibilities.
Freedom Day, which to me is every day, because in my country I'm able to work, I'm able to drive, I'm able to express myself, I'm also able to love whoever I want to. Things I really don't take for granted because I know some people aren't as fortunate, and that is why I celebrate Freedom Day.
Hello, my name is Nick Vani. I remember the 27th of April very well because I got woken up by my excited grandmother who was so excited to go to the polls, and her face was blooming with happiness, and I asked her about the importance of the day, and then she told me that she was doing that for her children and her grandchildren so that they could be able to roam around the country and to be able to achieve better education, and everybody in the country to live in peace and harmony, as South Africa is a beautiful and a rainbow nation. Obviously, I was too young to vote, but I do remember the day because I went there. I want everybody not to forget the Freedom Day because it is a significantly important day for everybody who lives in the country and outside the country.
So I remember the day that I was first allowed to vote, and that was freedom. It was freedom because for the first time in my life, having been born into and grown up in apartheid South Africa, it was the first time that I was told that my voice was important. That is freedom worth celebrating.
Between 1986 and 1991, I drove a safari truck from Nairobi to Cape Town which had secret compartments built into it, which concealed a ton of weapons each trip, destined for MK, the armed wing of the ANC. Being British, I wasn't eligible to vote in the South African election of April 27, 1994, yet I watched the events unfold from the UK with a sense of great achievement. This was the moment of liberation that for 5 years I had risked my life and liberty to help bring about. I felt a mix of hope and concern. Hope that finally the people would be free, and concern at how long it might take to achieve the transformation of South African society that everyone yearned for. Now, 27 years later, with every young South African that grows up filled with energy, enthusiasm and a hunger to succeed, the country takes another step closer towards realising the dream of equal rights and freedom. Today, the truck I drove is an exhibit at Lily's Leaf Farm Museum.
When I think of Freedom Day in 1994, I remember watching it unfold on the television. I remember those long snaking queues that went on for miles and miles and miles, and people standing for hours in the hot baking sun, ready to cast their vote for the first time. I remember the tears of joy and the inspirational stories. So thank you for Freedom Day.
In 1994, when we became a democracy, I was already an adult. I chose a job as a civil servant because freedom for me has meant working together with my compatriots to build the future that we want, because we cannot undo the legacy left by the past. We can build a better tomorrow. Freedom for me means that I can now be truly South African. I don't have to be a kind or a type. I am just a South African. That is the way that I would best describe the freedom that we've been endowed with. And I've taken great joy in enjoying that freedom, but knowing that that freedom was not free. It came at the expense of those who not only lost their lives, many are still alive, but they lost the best years of their lives fighting so that I and my children can enjoy the opportunity that comes with being in a society that is free and open.
Freedom Day, one man, one vote in South Africa, a real dream come true. Who would have ever thought that was possible after all the struggles under the apartheid regime, that we can today be free to have a vote in a democratic South Africa. May South Africa prosper and grow.
Hi, freedom is a state of mind. True freedom comes from knowing who you are, understanding where you come from, and actually being bold enough to dream beyond your current circumstances. It also means being able to choose any career that you like and actually loving it each and every single day of your life. And that is what true freedom means to me. Thank you.
Some very moving moments from ordinary people. Nick Stadlin's done a movie, Life is Wonderful, and in there you see the stories of people who gave up so much during the years for what they believed in and what they fought for, so that we have the ability to have had Mandela bring to us what we have today. Quite amazing. And if I look back, John, when I see the footage of you greeting Mandela and looking, I did see your pale blue suit, and looking into the background onto Devil's Peak, and you think how destroyed that mountain is at the moment, following the fire that we have recently had. And it did sort of base you quite quickly in terms of how much things are the same and yet things are so very, very different now. And I think in summary, some of the words that I would like to pick up that I heard over and over again today. He's tall, he's statuesque, he fills the space, he's very regal. He smiles, he's kind, he thinks, he advises, he's a grandfather, he loves the children. And he talked about his resilience, his humanity, his caring for others. And I thought the part that really was quite poignant, John, that you covered, is if things hadn't been what they were, could he have done what he did? And I think that's probably the moment I would like to leave with all of us, is sometimes you have to go through the experiences of life to be able to deliver on your journey what you wish to deliver. We can't not experience to bring value. At this point, if I could all ask you to put your cameras on, because I don't want to thank empty black boxes, please, if you don't mind. So if I'd like to, I'm just going to go in order of the screen in front of me. Veronica, thank you very much for your observations, for you as, in inverted commas, an ordinary person, and what Mandela's efforts made for you and therefore many other South Africans like you. Kathy, for picking up the mantle as a young Irish lady and making such a difference in Mandela's life. Whenever you spoke of him, you smile, your eyes light up. And I can imagine every time he thought of you, thanks to the children and this beautiful young lady, I'm sure his eyes lit up as much as yours do. Thank you so much for your insights. John, thank you very much for sharing the effort. I couldn't think of anybody better. I remember the very first gift you gave me when I became chairman of the chamber was your book, Mandela, with the photographic book that you gave me. And I'll never forget that book. I treasure it because it is such a lovely depiction of the man. We saw some of those photographs, or some photographs of Nelson Mandela during Karen Zoid's tribute, which was fantastic. Annabelle, you're an inspiration, absolute inspiration as a person who has achieved in a space. I had a mum and dad who didn't think girls could achieve and become educated or do anything with their lives. And I was a white South African of English parents from the UK. And I also had, that's not for you, you're a girl, things like that don't happen. So it's interesting, we had some correlations in our story, but I think yours were a lot tougher than mine. Mine were pretty tough, but I'm sure yours were far worse. You're an absolute inspiration to so many people. Thank you for your story. And to Zondwa, the man of the man, I thank you very much for your very wise, sage words of the strategist I see inside you. Very, very sage words, the wise owl. Thank you very much for bringing so much of Mandela into the lives of many people you do today through your foundation. So I'd like to thank you for that panel. We couldn't have done it without you. You've been absolutely fantastic. I really do appreciate it. To my team who helped us get everyone together, get everyone here, get everyone on stage, get everyone off stage, and to make it all happen as an event. I have done all my bits. I'd like to thank you all, and we have finished. We've got about a minute to spare. John, is there anything you want to say in the last minute? The one person who is not visual here that I would like to thank, I've just suddenly noticed we've got a box missing on the screen, is a very special thanks to Her Excellency Noma Tembi Tambo. She's such an inspiration for me. She's so supportive of things we do in the chamber, and she's always there giving us her environment to share, her house to do things at, parts of the chamber that we are able to use, the kitchens and you name it. And she's always got a smile and an arm around us, even if, I think the worst frustration I had was on my birthday in the middle of lockdown. We had the day we were allowed out of lockdown, 4th of July, and it was great. I had a few friends around out in the garden. We could do these things. And Tembi arrived, and we just stood there, like 2 meters apart, thinking, this doesn't feel right. It was so wrong, because that's not the way we normally greet each other. So at this point, I think we'll close. John, do you want to just say thank you?
Just to say, it's been a wonderfully enriching experience to hear the stories of all the fellow panelists. I'm much richer spiritually as a result of it. Thank you.
That's a lovely way of putting it. I have to say, I've seen that tribute to Mandela so many times, and I was having messages coming through to me of how many other people were in tears, and it does it for me every time. It is such an emotional tribute to him. And to all of you, you've given, as John said, I sit here with just emotion sitting right up here for the man who changed lives for every South African. Thank you. I appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Bye,
night.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.